We've noticed that there are better people than us everywhere. But how do they manage it? Maybe they, like the protagonist of today's film, Dan, have superpowers that ordinary people can't see, but they can be followed all their lives by members of the secret cult True Knot, who destroy such winners of life and feed on their powers. Florida, 1980. A girl named Violet goes into the woods to pick flowers, but runs into a mysterious woman who calls herself a magician and gives the girl a violet, after which she grabs and tells her about her uniqueness and perfection. But the girl is pounced upon by a mob. In 1980, sometime after his experience at the Overlook Hotel, or to be more precise, that very spot from the movie The Shining, Danny Torrance and his mother Wendy moved to Florida, where Danny is haunted by the ghost of a rotting woman in room 237 of the Overlook, the spirit of Danny's old friend, Dick Halloran, with whom the boy consults from time to time, explains to him that ghosts feed on the psychic abilities of children, the so-called radiants. Now that the hotel is abandoned, hungry ghosts haunt the boy, so Halloran teaches him to lock the spirits in imaginary boxes, as he was taught to do by his grandmother, who unfortunately no longer exists. It turns out that Danny ran away from his mother to the coast to talk to his imaginary friend, but when they return home together, Danny catches the ghost off guard and scary noises come from the bathtub. And then Danny nonchalantly returns to his mother and answers that he's fine now. And these were his first words since moving in, because before that he had been moving around the house in silence. 2011, 40-year-old Danny, now just Dan, became an alcoholic to quell the shining. He slept with a girl who turned out to be the baby's mother, but even that fact didn't deter him from stealing money from her, because at night she let his savings go to illegal substances. However, he tried to stop Dick. This is where Dan realized that he had reached rock bottom. Meanwhile, the same girl Rose from the beginning of the movie watches over 15-year-old Andy, who has the power of psychic control over people and uses them not for the best purposes. For example, zombifies adult men who wanted a sweet bite in the form of a girl and takes their wallets, leaving her mark as if after a snake bite. Rose and her partner catch her in the street, and a little later it is revealed that a secret society, True Knot, a cult of psychic vampires, led by Rose, is preying on the shining children. The cult members consume vapor, the psychic essence released during the torture and murder of the shining ones, thereby prolonging their lives. Rose nicknames Andy the Snakebite and initiates her into the ritual, after which she becomes one of them. Events shift to Anniston, where a little girl named Abra, admiring a magician's demonstrative performance, shows her abilities to her parents. Dan goes to a small town in New Hampshire and meets Billy Freeman, who finds him an apartment and brings him into Alcoholics Anonymous. After rehab, Dan takes a job at a hospice. He begins to use the shining to soothe dying patients, one of whom calls him Dr. Sleep. He also begins to receive telepathic messages from a girl named Abra Stone, whose radiance surpasses his own. 8 years later, Dan has made considerable progress in his circles, continued to comfort people before they die, and communicated with the now-grown Abra. The members of the True Knot are starving as steam becomes increasingly rare and less nourishing. They kidnap the boy Bradley Trevor and torture him to death by feeding on his steam. Abra senses this in her sleep, and her anxiety is telepathically transmitted to both Rose and Dan in the form of the word murder appearing on the wall of his room. Abra also telepathically orders the True Knot vampires to stop, and Rose notices her. A little later, however, the girl decided to find out the root of their movement and suddenly moved into the store, and not just moved, but started watching from Rose's perspective, who immediately detected the girl and forced her out of her head and immediately realized what a nourishing child she was dealing with. Their fight was also sensed by Dan. After realizing the danger, Abra comes to Dan and says she can track down the vampires if she touches Bradley's baseball glove. But Dan refuses to help the girl, advising her to suppress her shining to be invisible to the True Knot. That same night, Rose, meditating, sends her mind in search of Abra and finds her. But upon entering the girl's mind, she discovers an imaginary trap set by Abra there, during which time she manages to get into her mind and take away memories unknown to us yet. Rose breaks free, suffering a deep wound, and then successfully escapes. Abra reports her progress to Dan, and the man is going to help the girl after all. In the vampire settlement, cult member Grandpa Flick starves to death and evaporates, but everyone pounces on him like a dinner party. Halloran visits Dan one last time, telling him to protect Abra, thereby repaying his debt. Dan tells Billy Freeman about the true knot, and they go to the scene of Bradley's murder, exhume his body, and retrieve the gauntlet. They then arrive at the Stones' house, where they recruit Abra's father, Dave, and have him guard Abra. The girl sends her projection to a local scout camp, luring the true knot cult there as well. Abra manages to trick Andy into believing she is a teddy bear. Dan and Billy shoot most of them off, but a dying Andy forces Billy to shoot himself. Meanwhile, Rose's lover, Raven, kills Dave and kidnaps Abra, injecting her with powerful sleeping pills to suppress her shining. After much effort, Dan manages to telepathically communicate with Abra, who is under the influence of the injections. The girl allows him to gain control of her body and abilities, and Dan forces Raven into an accident in which the vampire dies. While Dan and Abra reunite, Rose absorbs the remaining supply of steam in the cult, healing her wounds and vowing revenge. Dan, realizing that they can't beat Rose, goes to extremes and brings Abra to the Overlook. This hotel, he believes, is as dangerous to Rose as it is to them, so the chance of winning here increases. Dan starts the hotel's boiler and explores the abandoned building, awakening it with his shining. He visits the rooms where his alcoholic father Jack tried to kill him and his mother. At the hotel bar, Dan meets a ghostly bartender named Lloyd who looks a lot like his father Jack. The ghost tries to convince Dan to have a drink, but he eventually refuses. Rose arrives at the Overlook. Dan and Abra pull her into Dan's mind, which is an endless maze of hedges. Dan tries to lock her in an imaginary box, but fails. Rose, attracted by Dan's shining, offers to join the cult, but he refuses. She then injures Dan and begins to torture him by absorbing his steam. Suddenly, Rose sees the boxes in which Dan used to lock up ghosts as a child. She realizes too late what they are, and Dan opens them all at once, unleashing the hungry Overlook ghosts. They brutally kill Rose by consuming her steam, and then infiltrate Dan's body. They then pursue Abra, hiding in room 237. But the girl is not afraid of Dan the ghost, saying that he has turned the hotel boiler on full blast beforehand, and an explosion is about to occur. Dan then comes to his senses for a moment and tells Abra to run outside. Obsessed, he rushes into the boiler room, but he can't fix anything anymore. Flames engulf the boiler room, then spread to the floors and rooms. At the last moment, Dan sees himself as a child being hugged by his mother. Abra watches helplessly as the Overlook burns down. Sometime later, Abra talks to Dan's spirit, and they assure each other that everything will be okay now. This is heard by Abra's mother, Lucy, to whom her daughter tells her that her father has found peace after his death. When her mother leaves the room, Abra notices that the ghost of the rotting Overlook woman is in the bathroom, and goes to lock her in a casket, as Danny once did. Please help us reach our goal of 10,000 subscribers on the channel. This is our biggest dream for the new year. And also don't forget to like and write comments. I hope to see you again.